Portrait of a Lady on Fire is a French film released in 2019, directed by female director Céline Sciamma. The story tells that the marriage of European women in the 18th century was not under their control. The female painter Marianne was invited to paint a portrait of the wealthy Lady Heloise. Portraits in that era were like photos. The man would get married only after he saw the portraits and was satisfied. While painting the portraits, the two got along day and night and developed a forbidden love. The story unfolds from Marianne's memories. Marianne came to a small island, the island full of women, like a utopia of women's world. Because Heloise didn't want to get married, and her sister committed suicide because she was forced to marry someone she didn't know, Marianne could only conceal her identity as a painter and secretly completed the portrait without cooperation. Marianne meets Heloise's mother, and there is a portrait of her in the picture, and she was married in the same way back then. Kaplan has mentioned that, within the film text itself, men gaze at women, who become objects of the gaze, and audiences need to identify with this male gaze, and to objectify the women on the screen. However, in this film it was not created under the male gaze. In this film, the subjects of all three layers of gaze changed to female. Marianne began to create portraits alone. She put on Heloise's clothes and started painting in front of the mirror. Later, she asked the maid to put on clothes as a model. The painting still lacked the most important Heloise face. This made Marianne very distressed. She could only try her best to observe Heloise in her life as much as possible. The most impressive part of the film is the gaze of the two women. Marianne sees Heloise for the first time, and Heloise looks back at Marianne, and the subject of the gaze is presented. As a painter, Marianne often needs to stare at the person being painted. She determines the image, expression, posture, and clothing of the person being painted, but Marianne also obeys the requirements of the gazers of mainstream society. The gazers behind her are men of that era. Power rulers. Women in a male context are always under the scrutiny of men, and this scrutiny is men defining women's aesthetics. The female director Céline Sciamma created a female utopia completely separated from men. The film presents this ideal in one shot: the lady, the painter, and the maid each take up a third of the screen. The maid embroiders, the painter pours wine, and the lady chops and washes vegetables. They are doing things that do not conform to their status, but the composition conveys equality and harmony quietly. Despite the lack of male characters, the shadow of the patriarchal society runs through the entire film, making people want to escape from it all. The two participated in the bonfire party, which was a party without the participation of men, and the women seemed to hold some kind of religious ceremony. Heloise and Marianne stared affectionately across the bonfire. The bonfire burned very vigorously between them. Their feelings were like the flame. Heloise's skirt caught fire, which symbolized that Heloise had completely fallen. Falling in love and people around rushing forward to extinguish the flame also imply that the relationship between the two cannot last like a flame. In the entire film, music appears only 3 times. The symphony at the end was the same piece that Marianne played to Heloise. The surging music corresponds to Heloise's heaving chest, expresses her deep thoughts for Marianne, reflects her mixed feelings. All the characters in the film are women, but there is always a sense of the great shadow of a male society outside this utopia. The maid Sophie is pregnant, but no woman chooses to find the father of the child. Instead, helps the maid to have an abortion by various means. The controversial topic of abortion is also presented in the film, which is thought-provoking. Sophie endured the pain of abortion while looking at the baby lying beside her. She loved the baby but couldn't give birth to it. In the evening, Heloise asked Marianne to draw it. It is a metaphor here that we cannot forget and submit to pain. Society is equal, not the shackles of women. The theme of pursuing equality is emphasized many times in the film. In the film, Heloise reads the myth of Orpheus. In the myth, Orpheus came to the underworld to save his wife. The king of Hades made a request that he should not look back at his wife before he walked out of the underworld, because he was afraid of losing his wife and eager to see her countenance. Orpheus turned his head, and Eurydice immediately fell into the abyss of darkness. The maid was very angry. Marianne felt that there must be some reason for Orpheus to turn back, and Heloise thought that Orpheus turning back was very poetic. Twice Marianne hallucinated that she looked back and saw Heloise in a white dress as if to remind her that Heloise was about to leave her. In the film, the flowers and the embroidery in the hands of the maid represent the relationship between the two, and the embroidery is completed when the flowers wither. It means that the time to part is coming. The two decided to keep a portrait for themselves and not for men, so Marianne drew 2 more portraits as souvenirs, one in the locket and the other on page 28 of the book.
Retourne-toi.
Heloise stopped Marianne and told her to look back. Many years later, Marianne showed her own painting of Orpheus and his wife at the art exhibition. In the picture, the two seemed to be saying, "Goodbye," just like Marianne looked back. Heloise considered the scene like poetry. The story has always been carried out in Marianne's memory. The love of the two women is like the story of Orpheus, destined to have no end. The two made a choice together, they didn't resist, they didn't escape. And they chose to keep the good things. Marianne recalled seeing Heloise from a distance at a concert in class. Marianne didn't go at her, just gazing at a distance. Gazing is more than just seeing with the eyes. People can gaze into their own hearts and recall the object of their desire in memory.